A woman was found dead in her bedroom. And at first, no one doubted it was an accident. But as time passed, more and more people noticed things that didn't add up. And investigators eventually took a closer look. What they uncovered pushed the case onto the national stage, grabbed the attention of millions, and despite everything that came to light, left questions that still haunt people to this day. Lucia Hale was born on March 14, 1977, in a mid-sized Pennsylvania town. She grew up in a close-knit family where caring for others was woven into daily life. From an early age, she wanted to help people. So after high school, she trained as a nurse and started building her career. Sometime later, she met a man named Robinson Hale, and at 31, she married him. Robinson was a successful architect with a growing reputation. The couple settled in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside the city where Robinson's architectural firm flourished. His career took off and eventually he established his own practice specializing in residential and commercial design. Lucia kept working as a nurse at the local hospital, becoming known for her extraordinary bedside manner and unwavering compassion. Over the years, she and Robinson gave a lot back to their community, taking part in local charity events, and Lucia even organized health fairs and volunteered at free clinics on her days off. As for Robinson, his architectural work shaped much of the neighborhood they lived in, so the couple was widely respected. By October 2025, Lucia was 48 and living what appeared to be a stable life. She was still working full-time at the hospital, pouring herself into caring for patients in the intensive care unit. On the evening of October 23rd, Lucia had come home from a 12-hour shift around 8 p.m., tired but in good spirits according to a colleague who'd walked her to her car. Robinson arrived home later, around 9:30, after meeting with a client. He later told police he'd made coffee for both of them as he always did. They were settling in for a quiet evening at home. But around 10:15, when Robinson said he went upstairs to bring Lucia her coffee, he noticed the bedroom seemed unusually still. He called out to her. No response. He stepped into the bedroom and found his wife collapsed on the floor near their bed. He immediately dropped to his knees and checked for a pulse. Nothing. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911, his voice shaking as he told the dispatcher his wife, a nurse, had fallen and wasn't breathing. The dispatcher kept him on the line, instructing him to begin chest compressions while help was on the way. Robinson said he tried, desperately pushing down on her chest, counting compressions the way he'd seen on television, but she remained completely unresponsive. By the time paramedics arrived 12 minutes later, they found Lucia in her nightclothes, lying in an awkward position between the bed and the dresser. Despite their efforts, they could only confirm what Robinson already knew. She was gone. In the days following Lucia Hale's death, the investigation seemed straightforward enough. A tired nurse, working long shifts, taking multiple medications. The kind of tragedy that happens when someone pushes themselves too hard for too long. The medical examiner signed off on accidental death due to medication interaction and exhaustion. Robinson made funeral arrangements. Colleagues sent flowers. The case appeared closed. But Detective Sarah Mendez couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She'd been one of the first responders that night, arriving shortly after the paramedics. While Robinson gave his statement in the living room, she'd stood in the bedroom doorway taking in the scene. The disarray seemed wrong somehow, staged, almost. The bedsheets were pulled halfway off the mattress. A lamp had been knocked over, pill bottles were scattered across the floor. Yet sitting perfectly upright on the nightstand, untouched and pristine, was a coffee mug. Not a drop spilled. Not even a ring of condensation beneath it. If she collapsed near the bed, Mendez had asked Robinson that night, how did nothing disturb that mug? Robinson had looked at her, his face drawn with grief. I don't know. I made it for her earlier. Maybe she never got to it. It was a reasonable answer. But reasonable answers sometimes hide unreasonable truths. 3 days after Lucia's death, Mendez requested the full case file. She started with Robinson's 911 call, listening to the recording multiple times. His voice was strained but controlled, understandable for someone discovering their spouse unresponsive. But something nagged at her. She pulled the phone records next. Robinson claimed he'd arrived home around 9:30 p.m. and found Lucia around 10:15. But his cell phone had pinged off a tower near their home at 8:47 p.m., more than 40 minutes earlier than he'd stated. When Mendez cross-referenced this with the medical examiner's estimated time of death, the window shifted. Lucia had likely died sometime between 9 o'clock and 9:45 p.m., which meant Robinson had been home when she died, or very shortly after. Why lie about when you got home? Mendez muttered to herself, highlighting the discrepancy in her notes. She decided to speak with Robinson again, this time at the station. He arrived looking exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, dressed in the same clothes he'd worn to make the funeral arrangements. "Mr. Hale, I need to clarify something about your timeline," Mendez said, sliding her notes across the table. "You told officers you arrived home around 9:30. But phone records show your cell phone was in the vicinity of your house by 8:47. Can you explain that?" Robinson blinked, seeming genuinely confused for a moment. I must have been mistaken. That night is a blur, detective. Maybe I got home earlier. I made coffee, went upstairs, I don't know. Does it really matter? In a death investigation, Mr. Hale, every detail matters." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face with both hands. "I'm grieving my wife. I'm sorry if I got the time wrong by 30 minutes. Mendez let it go for the moment. But she made a note. Subject defensive when questioned about timeline. Dismissive of discrepancy. The next break came from an unexpected source. Dr. Amanda Chin, a colleague of Lucia's from the hospital, called the police tip line 5 days after the funeral. She asked specifically to speak with whoever was handling Lucia Hale's case. When Mendez called her back, Chen's voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. "I don't want to speak ill of the dead or cause trouble," Chen began, "but I think you should know, Lucia was planning to leave Robinson." Mendez sat up straighter. "How do you know that?" "She told me. About 3 weeks before she died. We were having lunch in the hospital cafeteria, and she just broke down. Said she couldn't do it anymore, that Robinson had become controlling, jealous. She said he monitored her phone, questioned her about every minute she wasn't home. She felt trapped." "Did she give specific examples?" "She said he'd get angry if she worked late shifts, accuse her of having affairs with doctors. He controlled their finances, she had access to their joint account, but he monitored every purchase. She'd started setting aside cash from her paychecks, hiding it, saving up to rent an apartment." Mendez was taking rapid notes. "Did anyone else know about this?" "I think so. She mentioned talking to her friend Karen about it too. Karen Westbrook, they'd been friends since nursing school." Within 2 hours, Mendez was sitting across from Karen Westbrook in her living room. Karen was a petite woman in her late 40s with graying hair and kind eyes that filled with tears the moment Mendez mentioned Lucia's name. "She was terrified of him by the end," Karen said quietly. "She wouldn't say it outright, but I could see it. The last time I saw her, maybe 10 days before she died, she had these bruises on her upper arms. Like fingerprints. I asked her about them and she got flustered, said she'd bumped into a door frame at work." "You didn't believe her?" "I'm a nurse, detective. I know the difference between bumping into a door and being grabbed." Karen's voice hardened. "I asked her if Robinson had hurt her. She denied it, but she started crying. She made me promise not to say anything to anyone." "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" "Because I promised." Karen looked down at her hands. "And because I thought maybe I was reading too much into it. Everyone said it was an accident. The medical examiner ruled it an accident. Who was I to question that?" She looked up, her eyes fierce now. "But I haven't been able to sleep since the funeral. Those bruises didn't come from a door frame." Mendez thanked her and left with a growing sense that the closed case needed to be reopened. The preliminary autopsy report had noted some bruising on Lucia's body but attributed it to the collapse and possible attempts at resuscitation. Mendez requested a second review of the forensic evidence, this time asking the medical examiner to look specifically for signs of struggle rather than accidental death. Dr. James Patterson, the medical examiner, called her 3 days later. "You were right to push for a second look," he said, his voice grave. "I found contusions on both upper arms, consistent with being forcefully grabbed. There's also some bruising around her neck that I initially attributed to post-mortem lividity, but on closer examination, it could be consistent with pressure applied before death." "Are you saying someone strangled her?" "Not definitively. But there was force applied to her neck and arms before she died. The pattern doesn't match a simple collapse. And there's something else. I found a small laceration on the back of her head. It's subtle, easily missed on the first pass, but it's there. Like she hit something or something hit her." Mendez felt her pulse quicken. "Could it have happened during a fall?" "Maybe. But the angle is wrong. If she fell forward from a standing position, the injury should be on the front or side of her head. This is on the back, low, near the base of the skull. What does that suggest?" Patterson was quiet for a moment. "It suggests she was lying down or sitting when the trauma occurred. Like someone pushed her head against something. A headboard maybe." Mendez thought of the bedroom, the disarray, the untouched coffee mug sitting perfectly on the nightstand. "Dr. Patterson," she said slowly, what if this wasn't an accident? Then you have a homicide detective. And someone who went to great lengths to make it look like something else. The case might have remained closed forever if not for a retired forensic investigator named Marcus Webb who had a habit of reviewing old cases in his spare time, the way some people work crossword puzzles or 10 gardens. It kept his mind sharp and occasionally, just occasionally, he'd spot something everyone else had missed. In the autumn of 2028, 3 years after Lucia Hale's death, Webb was scrolling through a database of closed investigations when her case caught his attention. Something about the quick ruling and the lack of follow-up nagging at his instincts honed over 30 years in the field. He requested copies of the crime scene photographs, and when they arrived, he spread them across his dining room table, studying each image with the methodical patience that had made him legendary in forensic circles. The bedroom photos showed the expected chaos: rumpled bedding, a toppled lamp, pill bottles scattered across the hardwood floor, the kind of disarray you'd expect from someone collapsing in medical distress. But then Webb noticed it, and once he saw it, he couldn't unsee it. The coffee mug on the nightstand sitting perfectly upright, not a drop spilled, its surface catching the flash of the crime scene photographer's camera in a way that made it almost glow against the chaos surrounding it. Webb leaned closer, pulling out a magnifying glass like something from a detective novel, examining the mug's position relative to the disturbed items around it. Everything else on that nightstand had been affected by whatever happened in that room. A book knocked askew, reading glasses pushed to the edge, a phone charger cord trailing onto the floor, but the mug sat there pristine and undisturbed, as if it had been placed there after everything else had already happened. Webb picked up his phone and called Detective Sarah Mendez, who'd moved on to other cases but had never quite let go of the questions surrounding Lucia Hale's death. "Detective," Webb said when she answered, "I think someone staged that bedroom scene and I can prove it." Mendez met him the next day at a coffee shop, ironic given the subject of their discussion, and Webb walked her through his analysis, showing her enlarged photographs with annotations marking the mug's position, the lack of disturbance in its immediate vicinity, the way the coffee inside would have sloshed or spilled if there'd been any significant movement near the nightstand. "This mug was placed there after Lucia was already on the floor," Webb said, tapping the photo with his pen. "Whoever put it there wanted to support the story that it was a quiet evening at home, that Robinson had made coffee for his wife, that everything was normal right up until the moment she collapsed. But if she'd really fallen the way Robinson described, if there'd been the kind of struggle the forensic evidence suggests, that mug wouldn't be sitting there perfect and untouched." Mendez felt something click into place in her mind, all the inconsistencies and nagging doubts suddenly forming a coherent picture. "We need to reopen this case," she said, and Webb nodded, sliding a folder across the table containing his full analysis and recommendations for additional forensic testing that should be conducted. But before Mendez could even begin the process of convincing her superiors to reopen a 3-year-old closed case, something extraordinary happened that would make her job significantly easier. An anonymous letter arrived at the police station, addressed simply to Homicide Division, Lucia Hale case. The envelope had no return address, the postmark showed it had been mailed from a post office 2 towns over, and inside was a single typed page that read, "Lucia Hale did not die the way she was found. Someone moved her body. Someone cleaned the scene. Someone made it look like an accident. I know because I saw things that night that didn't make sense and I've stayed quiet for too long. Check the headboard of the bed. You'll find what you're looking for. A concerned citizen." The letter was simultaneously frustrating and tantalizing. Frustrating because the author remained anonymous and couldn't be questioned. Tantalizing because it pointed investigators toward specific evidence they might have overlooked. Mendez took the letter to her lieutenant, along with Webb's analysis of the coffee mug, and together they made the case for reopening the investigation and conducting additional forensic testing on evidence that had been preserved from the original scene. The lieutenant, a pragmatic woman named Torres who'd seen too many cases closed prematurely due to budget constraints and political pressure, studied the materials for a long moment before nodding her approval. "Bring the headboard in for testing," she said. "Let's see what we find." The headboard had been kept in evidence storage, a large wooden piece with an upholstered center panel, the kind of quality furniture you'd expect in a home like the Hales. When forensic technician Dr. Lisa Huang examined it under specialized lighting in the lab, she found something that made her breath catch: faint traces of biological material on the lower portion of the upholstered panel, in a position consistent with where someone's head might have made contact if they were lying in bed. The original investigators had swabbed the obvious areas of the bedroom but had never tested the headboard itself, operating under the assumption that Lucia had collapsed on the floor rather than on the bed. Dr. Huang carefully collected samples from 3 different locations on the headboard, documenting each with photographs and detailed notes, then sent them for DNA analysis and blood pattern analysis. The results came back 2 weeks later and changed everything. The biological traces contained Lucia's blood and tissue, and the pattern suggested impact rather than casual contact, meaning she had struck the headboard with significant force, or had been struck against it. More tellingly, the blood spatter analysis showed directionality inconsistent with Robinson's version of events. He'd claimed Lucia had simply collapsed to the floor, but the evidence indicated she'd been on or near the bed when the initial trauma occurred, that her head had made violent contact with the headboard, and that she'd then been moved to the floor where she was eventually found. When Mendez reviewed the findings, she felt the familiar weight of certainty settling over her, the feeling she got when a case finally revealed its truth after hiding behind layers of deception. The coffee mug, the anonymous letter, the biological evidence on the headboard, each piece individually might have been explained away, but together they painted a clear picture of a crime scene that had been carefully manipulated, a death that had been staged to look like an accident, and a husband whose story was falling apart under scrutiny. "We're not looking at an accident anymore," Mendez told Lieutenant Torres, laying out the forensic reports on her desk. "We're looking at a homicide, and Robinson Hale just became our primary suspect." With the case officially reopened as a potential homicide, Detective Mendez began the painstaking process of dismantling Robinson Hale's account of that October night, and what she discovered was a timeline so riddled with inconsistencies that it became clear he'd been lying from the very beginning. The phone records told a story dramatically different from the one Robinson had presented. His cell phone had pinged off the tower near his home at 8:47 p.m., not the 9:30 arrival time he'd claimed, and more damning still, there was a gap in his phone activity between 9:15 and 10:12 p.m., a 57-minute window during which his phone was either turned off or in airplane mode, the exact period when Lucia had died. When confronted with this discrepancy, Robinson changed his story, now claiming he'd arrived home earlier than he remembered, that the stress and grief had confused his memory, but Mendez had been interviewing suspects long enough to know the difference between genuine confusion and deliberate deception. The 911 call itself became another point of scrutiny. Forensic audio analysts noted that Robinson's voice, while appropriately distressed, lacked the physiological markers of genuine panic. His breathing was too controlled, his speech too measured, and most tellingly, when the dispatcher asked him to describe exactly what he was seeing, there was a brief pause before he answered, as if he were choosing his words carefully rather than simply reporting what was in front of him. But it wasn't just the technical evidence that undermined Robinson's credibility. Witnesses who'd been at the scene that night began coming forward with observations that had seemed insignificant at the time but now took on sinister meaning. A paramedic named James Chin told investigators that when he'd arrived at the Hale residence, Robinson had been oddly composed, directing them upstairs with none of the frantic energy you'd expect from someone who'd just found their spouse dead, and more strangely, Robinson had apologized for the mess, as if concerned about the appearance of his home even in the midst of a medical emergency. One of the first responding officers, a rookie named Danny Ortiz, remembered something that had struck him as odd but that he'd dismissed at the time. When he'd entered the bedroom, he'd noticed Robinson standing near the dresser with a cloth in his hand, and when asked what he was doing, Robinson had said he'd been straightening up a bit while waiting for help to arrive. Who straightens up while their wife is dying? Ortiz said during his interview with Mendez, the question hanging in the air like an accusation. A neighbor, Mrs. Patricia Delgado, who lived 3 houses down, reported that she'd seen Robinson's car in the driveway when she'd walked her dog around 9 p.m., a full hour and 15 minutes before he claimed to have discovered Lucia, and she specifically remembered because she'd thought it unusual that he was home so early on a night he usually worked late. As Mendez dug deeper into Robinson's life, she uncovered another motive that had been hiding beneath the surface of his respectable architect persona: financial ruin. Robinson's firm, which had once been thriving, had been hemorrhaging money for the past 2 years, a combination of poor investments, a lawsuit from a dissatisfied client, and several projects that had gone over budget and under compensation. Bank records showed that Robinson had taken out a second mortgage on their home without Lucia's knowledge, forging her signature on the documents, and he'd maxed out multiple credit cards, accumulating over $200,000 in debt. Even more damning, investigators discovered that Lucia had a life insurance policy worth $500,000, with Robinson as the sole beneficiary, a policy he'd convinced her to increase just 8 months before her death. When detectives interviewed Robinson's business partner, a man named Marcus Thompson, he reluctantly admitted that Robinson had been desperate, talking about needing a major influx of cash to save the firm, and that he'd seemed increasingly unstable as the financial pressure mounted. He said something strange about 6 months before Lucia died, Thompson recalled, his face troubled. He said that sometimes the only way out of a hole is if someone throws you a rope, and if no rope comes, you have to find another way out. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now looking back, it sounds like he was contemplating something drastic. The financial investigation also revealed Robinson's obsessive need for control. He'd installed monitoring software on Lucia's phone without her knowledge, tracking her location and reading her messages, and he'd set up their joint bank account so that he received alerts every time she made a purchase over $20. Friends of Lucia confirmed that Robinson had become increasingly jealous and possessive in the year before her death, calling her repeatedly during her shifts at the hospital, showing up unexpectedly to take her to lunch, and questioning her about every male colleague she mentioned. The forensic evidence continued to mount, each new discovery tightening the noose around Robinson's neck. Crime scene investigators, upon re-examining the bedroom with fresh eyes and new directives, found fibers from Robinson's work clothes embedded in the upholstery of the headboard, despite his claim that he'd never touched the bed that night, only pulling Lucia from the floor to attempt CPR. DNA analysis of trace evidence collected from under Lucia's fingernails revealed skin cells that matched Robinson's DNA profile, suggesting she'd scratched him during a struggle, and when detectives requested to photograph Robinson's arms and torso, he refused, claiming it was an invasion of privacy, but his attorney eventually allowed a medical examination that revealed several healing scratches on his forearms, which Robinson claimed came from yard work. The evidence was overwhelming, circumstantial perhaps in individual pieces but devastating in aggregate, and when Mendez laid it all out in a presentation to the district attorney, the timeline inconsistencies, the staged crime scene, the financial motive, the forensic evidence, the witnesses who'd noticed his strange behavior, the DA nodded slowly and said what Mendez had been waiting months to hear. Bring him in. We're charging Robinson Hale with the murder of his wife. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place when Dr. Elizabeth Ramirez, a renowned forensic pathologist brought in as a consultant, conducted a comprehensive reanalysis of the blood evidence found on the headboard, using advanced techniques that hadn't been available during the original investigation, and what she discovered was so damning that it removed any lingering doubt about what had happened in that bedroom on October 23, 2025. The blood spatter pattern on the headboard told a story written in crimson. Multiple impact points indicating Lucia's head had struck the padded surface not once but 3 times, each impact occurring while she was in a seated or semi-reclined position on the bed, and the directional flow of the blood droplets revealed that she'd been facing away from the headboard when the trauma occurred, meaning someone had pushed her backward with considerable force. Dr. Ramirez's analysis went further, examining the angle and velocity of the blood spatter to determine that the impacts had happened in rapid succession, not the result of a fall or collapse but of a violent, sustained attack. Even more chilling was the discovery of transfer patterns on the headboard's fabric, areas where blood had been smeared rather than splattered, suggesting that after the initial trauma, someone had pressed something soft against the bloodied area, likely in an attempt to control bleeding or muffle sounds, and the forensic team theorized that this soft object was a pillow, the same pillow that may have been used to silence Lucia permanently. With this new forensic evidence in hand, Detective Mendez worked with the district attorney's office to reconstruct the final moments of Lucia Hale's life, piecing together a narrative from forensic analysis, witness statements, and the physical evidence that Robinson had tried so desperately to conceal. The reconstruction began earlier that evening. Lucia had arrived home from her 12-hour shift exhausted but relieved to be done, and according to the timeline they'd established, Robinson had arrived shortly after her, earlier than he'd claimed, catching her at a vulnerable moment when her defenses were down. The evidence suggested that an argument had erupted, perhaps about the financial troubles Robinson had been hiding, or maybe about Lucia's plans to leave him that he'd discovered through the monitoring software on her phone, and the argument had moved from downstairs to the bedroom, escalating with each step. Forensic analysis indicated that Lucia had been sitting on the bed, possibly trying to disengage from the confrontation, when Robinson had grabbed her by the arms, those fingerprint bruises that her friend Karen had noticed, and during the struggle Lucia had fought back, scratching at his forearms trying to push him away. That's when Robinson had lost control completely, shoving Lucia backward with such force that her head struck the headboard, stunning her, and when she tried to recover, tried to scream or call for help, he pushed her again, harder this time, the second impact leaving more blood on the upholstered panel. The third impact had come moments later, Robinson's rage fully unleashed, and by then Lucia was dazed, bleeding, struggling to maintain consciousness. But she was still alive, still making sounds that might alert neighbors, still capable of exposing what he'd done, and that's when Robinson had grabbed a pillow from the bed and pressed it over her face, holding it there despite her weakened struggles, despite the way her body convulsed and fought for air, holding it until she finally went still. The medical examiner's re-evaluation of Lucia's injuries supported this reconstruction. The petechial hemorrhaging in her eyes, initially attributed to medication effects, was actually consistent with asphyxiation, and the subtle bruising around her mouth and nose, so faint it had been missed in the original autopsy, matched the pattern of pressure from a soft object held firmly in place. After Lucia was dead, Robinson had faced the terrifying reality of what he'd done, and instead of calling for help, instead of confessing, he'd made a calculated decision to cover his tracks, to transform a murder scene into what looked like an accidental death. He'd moved her body from the bed to the floor, positioning her near the dresser to match his story about finding her collapsed, and he'd scattered pill bottles around to support the medication overdose narrative, taking them from the medicine cabinet and various places throughout the house. He'd knocked over the lamp to create signs of a medical emergency, pulled the bedsheets askew to suggest she'd been restless, and then, in what investigators now recognized as either arrogance or obsessive attention to detail, he'd gone downstairs, made fresh coffee and carried a mug up to the bedroom, placing it carefully on the nightstand. The perfect domestic touch to complete his fiction of a quiet evening at home interrupted by tragedy. That coffee mug, sitting pristine and untouched amid the manufactured chaos, became the symbol of Robinson's guilt, physical proof that the scene had been staged after Lucia's death, because if she'd really collapsed suddenly from medication complications, if the evening had unfolded naturally as Robinson claimed, that mug would have been knocked over, spilled, disturbed in some way by the commotion. But it sat there perfect and damning, placed by a man who just murdered his wife and was now trying to sell a story to first responders and investigators. The mug represented Robinson's fatal mistake. His need to make the scene too perfect, too consistent with his narrative, when real accidents are messy and chaotic and don't follow convenient storylines. When Detective Mendez presented this reconstruction to the grand jury, complete with crime scene photos showing the pristine coffee mug, forensic analysis of the headboard blood patterns, and expert testimony about the staging of the scene, the jurors sat in stunned silence. And within an hour they'd returned an indictment charging Robinson Hale with first-degree murder, and the case that had been closed as an accident 3 years earlier was now headed to trial as one of the most calculated homicides the county had ever prosecuted. The trial of Robinson Hale began on a cold morning in February 2029, nearly 4 years after Lucia's death, and from the moment the prosecution delivered its opening statement, it was clear this would be one of the most closely watched trials in the state's recent history, with news vans lining the street outside the courthouse and reporters providing live updates to audiences who'd become obsessed with the case of the nurse who died in her own bedroom while her architect husband claimed it was nothing more than a tragic accident. Robinson sat at the defense table looking gaunt and diminished, a far cry from the successful, confident man he'd been when Lucia was alive, and he maintained his innocence with a quiet, wounded dignity that his attorney, a seasoned defense lawyer named Gerald Hutchins, tried to exploit at every opportunity, painting Robinson as a grieving widower being railroaded by overzealous investigators who twisted innocent circumstances into sinister evidence. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Catherine Morrison, presented their case with methodical precision over 3 weeks, calling witness after witness to dismantle Robinson's story piece by piece. Detective Mendez testified about the timeline inconsistencies and the staged crime scene. Dr. Ramirez walked the jury through the blood spatter evidence on the headboard with photographs so detailed that several jurors looked away, and Lucia's friends took the stand to describe her fear. In the final weeks of her life, the bruises on her arms, her whispered plans to leave her husband. Morrison's presentation of the coffee mug evidence became the trial's defining moment. She had the actual mug brought into the courtroom, placing it on a replica nightstand surrounded by photographs of the chaotic bedroom scene, and she asked the jury a simple question that echoed through the silent courtroom. If Lucia Hale collapsed in a medical emergency, if there was genuine chaos in that room, how does this mug sit here perfect and untouched? The defense fought back aggressively, calling their own forensic experts who suggested alternative explanations for the blood patterns, argued that the bruises on Lucia's arms could have been from her work in the hospital's intensive care unit where she regularly handled combative patients, and insisted that the timeline discrepancies were the result of grief and trauma affecting Robinson's memory rather than evidence of deception. Hutchins portrayed Robinson as a devoted husband destroyed by loss, a man whose only crime was loving his wife too much to accept that her exhaustion and medication had killed her, and he suggested that the police, embarrassed by their initial ruling of accidental death, had manufactured a murder case to cover their own incompetence. But then came a moment no one had anticipated, a piece of evidence so unusual that it would be debated in legal circles for years to come. The prosecution called Mrs. Patricia Delgado, the neighbor who'd seen Robinson's car that night, and she brought with her something unexpected. Her dog, a border collie named Bailey, who'd been Lucia's frequent companion during her evening walks through the neighborhood. Morrison had learned that Bailey had been present in the Hale house multiple times when Lucia was alive, that the dog had loved Lucia and tolerated Robinson, and she'd gotten special permission from the judge to conduct what she called a behavioral demonstration, that defense attorneys objected to strenuously but were overruled on the grounds that animal behavior evidence had precedent in criminal cases. What happened next sent ripples through the courtroom. Mrs. Delgado walked Bailey down the aisle toward the defense table, and the moment the dog spotted Robinson, it began to bark furiously, straining at its leash, hackles raised, displaying the kind of aggressive behavior Mrs. Delgado swore she'd never seen from the normally gentle animal. Bailey loved Lucia, Mrs. Delgado testified, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to control the agitated dog. After Lucia died, I took Bailey past the Hale house several times, and every single time he would stop and whine at the door. Dogs know things we don't. Bailey knows what happened to his friend. The defense objected again, arguing that dog behavior wasn't reliable evidence, that Bailey might simply be reacting to the stress of the courtroom environment, but the damage was done. The jury had seen a beloved family pet, an animal known throughout the neighborhood for its gentle temperament, reacting to Robinson with unmistakable fear and hostility, and in that moment, something shifted in the courtroom's atmosphere, a collective sense that they were seeing truth manifest in a form beyond words and forensic reports. The prosecution's closing argument tied everything together. The financial motive of Robinson's crushing debt and the life insurance policy, the physical evidence of the staged crime scene and the blood on the headboard, the timeline lies and the witnesses who'd seen through his performance, and yes, even the dog's reaction, all of it pointing to one inescapable conclusion. Robinson Hale had murdered his wife in a fit of rage, then coldly and methodically tried to cover it up, going so far as to make coffee and place it on her nightstand to complete his fiction. Morrison's final words to the jury were simple and devastating. Lucia Hale was a nurse who spent her life caring for others, and she died at the hands of the one person who'd vowed to protect her. Don't let him get away with it. Don't let that coffee mug sitting pristine on the nightstand be the perfect crime it was meant to be. The jury deliberated for 18 hours over 3 days, and when they filed back into the courtroom, not one of them would meet Robinson's eyes. The four women stood and delivered the verdict that would close this chapter of the case. Guilty on all counts, first-degree murder with special circumstances of premeditation and deliberation, and the courtroom erupted in a mixture of sobs from Lucia's family and friends, shouts from Robinson's few remaining supporters, and the sharp crack of the judge's gavel demanding order. Robinson's face remained expressionless as the verdict was read, but those sitting close enough said they saw his hands trembling as the bailiff placed him in handcuffs, and as he was led from the courtroom, Mrs. Delgado's dog Bailey, still present in the gallery, let out a single mournful howl that seemed to speak for everyone who'd loved Lucia Hale and had waited 4 long years for justice. Robinson Hale was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole 6 weeks after his conviction, and as the judge delivered the sentence in a courtroom packed with Lucia's colleagues, friends and family members, there was no sense of triumph or celebration, only a heavy, exhausted grief that justice, while finally served, could never bring back the gentle nurse who dedicated her life to caring for others and had died terrified in her own bedroom at the hands of the man who'd promised to love her. Lucia's parents, who'd sat through every day of the trial watching their daughter's final moments dissected and analyzed, spoke outside the courthouse with voices cracked by sorrow, saying that while they were grateful Robinson would never hurt anyone else, no sentence could fill the void left by their daughter's absence, couldn't give them back the Sunday phone calls and holiday visits, couldn't restore the future that had been stolen from her. The case took a devastating toll on everyone it touched. Lucia's colleagues at the hospital struggled with guilt, wondering if they'd missed signs or could have done more to help her escape, and Dr. Amanda Chin, who testified about Lucia's plans to leave Robinson, told reporters that she'd replay their last lunch conversation endlessly, searching for some way she could have changed the outcome. The hospital held a memorial service where co-workers shared stories of Lucia's compassion, her ability to calm frightened patients with just her presence, the way she'd stay late to sit with families receiving bad news because she couldn't bear for them to face those moments alone, and the overflow crowd testified to how many lives she'd touched during her 20 years as a nurse. Robinson's family, the few who stood by him, insisted he'd been wrongly convicted, that the evidence had been circumstantial and manipulated, But even his business partner Marcus Thompson admitted in interviews that the man he'd known had changed in those final months before Lucia's death, becoming paranoid and controlling, consumed by financial stress and jealous rage. The trial had revealed secrets that shattered the image of the Hales' perfect marriage. Neighbors who'd envied their beautiful home and apparent success now understood they'd been witnessing a slow-motion tragedy, a woman trapped by fear and a man whose need for control had metastasized into something deadly, and the case became a grim teaching moment about the masks people wear and the violence that can lurk behind closed doors in even the most respectable neighborhoods. In the months following Robinson's sentencing, Lucia's closest friends and colleagues channeled their grief into action, establishing the Lucia Hale Foundation for Domestic Violence Awareness, an organization dedicated to supporting victims trying to leave dangerous relationships, providing resources for housing, legal assistance and counseling that Lucia herself never got the chance to access. The foundation's first fundraiser, held at the hospital where Lucia had worked, raised over $100,000, with former patients traveling from across the state to honor the nurse who'd cared for them in their darkest hours, and the foundation's mission statement quoted something Lucia had once said to a colleague: "Everyone deserves to feel safe in their own home, and if they don't, we have to help them find a way out." The case sparked broader conversations about domestic violence in seemingly stable, middle-class families, about how economic abuse and psychological control often precede physical violence, and about the importance of believing victims when they try to tell their stories, even when those stories contradict the public image of their relationships. Legal experts analyzed the trial for its unusual elements: the dog behavior evidence, the forensic reevaluation years after the original ruling, the anonymous letter that had helped crack the case, and the coffee mug became an almost mythical symbol in true crime circles, representing the small detail that unravels even the most carefully planned deception. Detective Sarah Mendez, who'd never stopped questioning Lucia's death even when the case was officially closed, retired from the force 2 years after Robinson's conviction, but she kept a photograph on her desk from that first night in the Hale bedroom, the image showing that pristine coffee mug sitting on the nightstand amid the manufactured chaos, and she told a documentary crew years later that the mug had taught her the most important lesson of her career: perfection is suspicious. Real life is messy. When something looks too carefully arranged, start asking why. The Hale house was eventually sold, the new owners unaware of its history until curious neighbors filled them in, and they reported that sometimes late at night they'd hear what sounded like crying coming from the master bedroom, though they knew rationally it was just the old house settling or wind in the eaves. Lucia's grave in the town cemetery became a pilgrimage site of sorts, with visitors leaving flowers and notes, many from domestic violence survivors who'd found the courage to leave their own dangerous situations after learning Lucia's story, and the foundation placed a bench nearby with an inscription reading, "Lucia Hale, RN. She cared for everyone but couldn't save herself. Let her story save others." The case remains one of the most discussed and debated deaths in recent memory, analyzed in podcasts and documentaries, studied in forensic science courses and criminal justice programs, serving as a chilling reminder that the most dangerous place for some people is their own home, that financial desperation and wounded pride can turn love into lethal obsession, and that the warning signs of domestic violence are often visible to everyone except those closest to the situation who've been trained to explain them away. And somewhere in an evidence locker, preserved as part of the permanent case file, sits that coffee mug, its ceramic surface still bearing the faint residue of coffee that was never drunk, placed on a nightstand by a murderer trying to complete his fiction, a mundane household object transformed into a symbol of deception, of the crucial clue that detectives couldn't see for years until finally, someone looked at the scene with fresh eyes and asked the right question. If you're fascinated by true crime stories and the dark secrets they hide, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Stay updated on the latest cases, shocking twists, and gripping investigations, because the truth is always darker than you think, and sometimes, as Lucia Hale's story proves, it's hiding in the most ordinary objects, waiting years for someone to finally see what was there all along.